I wanted to show you how to paint a projection texture onto this building, and going to combine a few techniques. You'll notice that each of these sort of shingles has the exact same texture and it looks very repetitive, and you don't want to have to paint each individual shingle. It would take too long, but maybe you like the start that you have with each of those shingles, and you want to be able to paint detail on each wall one at a time. So what we're going to do is to create a projection texture where, almost like, imagine you were pointing a slide projector at a surface and you were painting on that to create the texture. So it's the whole surface at once from one angle. So that'll work well for these walls since they're flat, and they're not too deep. So what I'll need to do though is to kind of get the image of all these tiles out, and for that I'm going to render it and then take that rendered image and then paint on it and then bring it back in as a projection texture. So the first thing is when we want to render it, there's a number of different renderers, and Maya Hardware 2.0 will allow you to very quickly render essentially what's just on the screen, with some caveats, and you can also render it bigger than your whole screen, which is helpful if we want to get pretty good resolution on the texture. So fortunately these have already been grouped, so I'm just going to work on this wall here to start with. You can see a nice trick is to go show, isolate, view selected if you want to see just the selected ones, but that's not going to help us in the render. So the other trick here, let's just select one of these, and if we click this button, it's graph materials on selected objects, it'll show the material mapped on there, is that if we render it with hardware render, it's going to take into account the lights, and we sort of want to remove that from the equation. We just want straight up the textures exactly as they are, not taking into account the lighting. So there's a little bit of a trick for that. And you can see this texture is mapped to the color. That shows you something's mapped to it. But if you map it instead of the color to the incandescence, so I'm just going to take this little guy and middle mouse drag him to the incandescence, and then I'll right mouse click on color and break that. Now it looks very funny right now. It looks very bright and unusual, but don't worry about it. When we render it, it'll be precisely the color of the texture. So the other thing is, how do we separate it out so we're only rendering just this wall? Well, if I click on my channel box, you've probably been using the display layers, but there's also render layers, and I have all those tiles selected, and this button will create a new layer and assign the selected objects. And again, this is a render layer, not a display layer, so it's a layer deciding the things we're going to render. So I'll hit that button, and now when I click on that layer, we just see that. And this, again, this still looks wrong, but that's okay. I'm going to go to the front view, so I'm exactly, straight on facing this wall, and I'm going to click my render settings button, and we said Maya Hardware 2.0. You can see it's got that layer 1. I could give it a name, but it's fine. And under common, we can get a much bigger resolution. Like, let's say 4K square is going to be very big, give us plenty of pixels there, bigger than most people's screens, and probably everybody's screen, because it's 4K square. That's 4,000 pixels horizontally and vertically. And make sure we're using the front camera here. And if you want to see the area that it's rendering, you can go View, Camera Settings, Resolution Gate, and see anything inside that it's going to render. So it's fitting the whole thing in there. I'll hit the render button. You can see that was it's very quick. And if we zoom in, we can see that it's pretty high amount of detail because I chose that 4K. Theoretically, you go bigger than that, but you don't need to. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to edit it in Photoshop. I'm going to save it in my source images because I'm going to pull it back out of there. So since I'm going to edit it in Photoshop, I'll just choose file type PSD, and let's call this wall projection 01. And let's go into Photoshop and open that up, wall projection 01. And the first thing I want to do is crop it, and so a quick trick for that is if I take the magic wand and select everything outside of this and then inverse my selection, Control Shift I, then I can go to Image, Crop, and it crops it for me. I could paint right on here, but I prefer to use a new layer, because then if I don't like what I'm painting, I can erase it and I'll leave the image behind. You can see, again, we've kept a lot of detail on these things. I mean, if you get really close, it starts blurring, but don't imagine we're going to get that close to those shingles. If you think you are, you could make it even bigger, but that's getting a little crazy. So at this point, you can paint on dust, dirt, any way you want. I might, I'm getting a brush. I might, get a lower opacity here. I have 25%. Maybe get some kind of grayish thing here, something like that, and get a nice big brush, and maybe, the ground has got some kind of dirt on there, and maybe there's just a few other kind of light spots, and maybe there's some dark spots too, just to kind of break it up a little bit. And then you can get more specific, like maybe along here there was sort of like a drip of some kind that's like left some sort of kind of water stain here or something like that. If you're not happy with that, maybe you could smudge it or something. Whoops, that's doing all layers. I'm going to go back and turn that off. Okay, there we go. Then we can just, do that to just this one. Anyways, just go nuts, really think about the aging and how it might change. And, just to make sure we're covered, we should give it just a background brown. I mean, this should cover all those tiles, but I'm going to make a new layer and pick the brown. I'll just hold down Alt and click on there, but then I'm going to go ahead and make that darker, and then Alt click there. And so then we know, we're solid in case it's not exactly perfectly lined up. I'll select all these layers, Control E to flatten them, and File, Save As, and I'll just use TIFF. You can use Targa, whatever, doesn't matter that much. And it's called Wall Projection 01.tiff. So now I'm going to go back into Maya and close this guy. And if I want, right now, I might just go ahead and delete that layer, because I don't need that and it might sort of confuse things now. So I'm just hitting the up arrow because that's all been grouped. It'll select that whole wall, and I can right mouse click and we'll go ahead and assign a new material. I'll just use Lambert and double click on that. Color map. Here's the little trick to it where it says File, right mouse click, Create as Projection, and then Fit to Bounding Box. And what you should see is it'll fit exactly to the tiles of the wall that we had, which again is the same as the size of the texture, so it should line up very nicely. And then click here to go to the image, click the folder button to browse for the image. I put it in my source images folder so it goes directly there, and there you go. You can see that like that drip I painted on there and so forth. So there is one important last step. Let me just sort of straighten these out so you can kind of see the the texture we've created. That's the image, and it's being projected on to this material. So very important to select all these again, shift select the material, and under the texturing menu, create texture reference object. Now the reason for that is, remember I said it's sort of like a slide projector pointing at the surface, and if you're going to blow up this wall later and send shingles flying at the camera, a projection texture really does work like a slide projector. So it would appear that the objects, if they're moving, that they're actually moving through that projection rather than the texture sticking to the surface. But creating a texture reference object says, okay, let's make another copy of this surface that's going to stay put and be templated, and we'll just use that reference object to tell the main object how the texture sits on it. So it's still calculating it with a projection, but it's making it stick because you have a set of objects that aren't moving, and that kind of refers to it. But if that didn't make sense, don't worry about it. Select the surfaces, shift select the material, texture, create texture reference object will make a projection texture stick. So that's a quick way to kind of help you paint and get some variety to the textures on your surface.